Hello, BookTube. We're continuing my library tour. I've once again set up the sexy tripod so that to get the best angle that I can think of. And we've got some transverse books, so we'll deal with those first for this next shelf. And the first one is great, but also kind of ridiculous. This is a lovely printing that Random House did years ago of James Goldman's play, The Lion in Winter, that formed the basis for my favorite movie, the movie version of The Lion in Winter. And I love the play. The play has stuff in it that isn't in the movie, although the movie is extremely faithful. The one thing that makes it a little ridiculous is the cover design. That is the cover design. I laughed at it when I first saw it. I bought it when I first saw it because I didn't have a copy of The Lion in Winter, but nothing like that happens in the play. That cover does not represent anything. It is just a provocative, alluring, sexy cover. That is all. So I always found that kind of funny. Then we have, this is a translation by Anne Pippin Burnett of the Odes of Pindar. Pindar's athletic odes are amazing. They're also very recondite. They don't yield their treasures easily. I thought this was a really, really good translation. I don't think it's bilingual. No, it's not. But I liked it a lot. And I think that I reviewed it at length. If I did, then I will, once again, go through the time-consuming ordeal of setting up the prose stuff down in the information section. I don't know how many people even look at that stuff, but I feel that the video isn't complete without it. And so I do it, even though it takes extra time. Okay, this is by Laura Santoro. This is a novel from relatively recently, I think. When was this? This has the pub sheet in it. Pub sheet is folded wrong. This is from January of 2013, so before we knew each other. And it's The Boy. And it's a novel of a familiar type about an older woman who falls in lust and then in love with a younger boy, a much younger, a teenager. And it's a difficult thing to write correctly. It's a difficult thing not to be, when you're writing it in fiction, it's a difficult thing not to be condescending to both characters. Most writers who try to do it, even with the best intentions in the world, end up being condescending to both characters. And I understand that because it's a difficult dynamic. It's a complex dynamic. If it's not just explicitly exploitive, it's a difficult dynamic. But still, I think this book did a good job. There's also another novel, it should be in this room, called A Much Younger Man, which also does the same thing. Also does a very good job doing the same thing. Although I'm not sure that it does a good enough job for it to be in this room. I mean, I look at it and I think I like that. I remember it well, but I don't look at it and think, boy, I can't wait to sit down and reread that. And I want that feeling to be the one that governs what's in this room. Oh wait, this next one is D. Guttleplan. This is the Holocaust on Trial, and this is about the British historian David Irving and the slow, gradual creep of his Nazi apologetics to the point where now he is, I believe, still alive and is just reflexively reviled. He's banned from half a dozen countries in the Western world, and reflexively reviled by all working historians. They only mention him to refute him. And even then, they often don't mention him. Peter Longerich, in his new book on Hitler, mentions Irving just once, just to heap scorn on him. A brand new book on the firebombing of Dresden, a subject on which Irving wrote his first breakout book, and on which he raised the consciousness of the West. No matter what you think of him personally, he raised the consciousness of the book. Was a huge bestseller all over the world. The new book on the firebombing of Dresden doesn't mention him. He did original research on the firebombing of Dresden. Now, some of that research is wrong. Some of it was credulously exaggerated or just mistaken, but a lot of it wasn't. In other words, the only reason that he's excluded, completely excluded from a book on the firebombing of Dresden, or a little bit earlier, a book on the Diaries of Goebbels, is because the author of the present book doesn't want the stink of David Irving on their work, doesn't want letters, angry letters sent to the publisher. That's all. That's the only reason. And that's not a good reason. That's a historically fraudulent reason. And this is the story of the events that caused that to become politically necessary. This is the story of David Irving going on trial. And it inevitably, the trial, he went on trial to defend his reputation against one imputation made by Deborah Lipstadt. But the trial inevitably was going to extend to become a referendum on his viability as a historian. And the whole incident is utterly fascinating, just utterly fascinating. It's very seldom, it happens very seldom, that a trial, a high-profile trial, will be about essential things in a way that this trial was. I mean, yes, it was a libel action. Yes, it was one person against another warring over the specifics of a reputation. But it was also about history and the truth and the burdens and obligations of historians to the public. Just a fascinating story. And as much as I love The Holocaust on Trial, Good Old Plan, his book is very good. I also like Richard Evans's book on the subject. I still think that the great book on the whole question of David Irving has yet to be written. I don't think anyone's written. I think that the time has passed when it could be comfortably written anyway. This book was written before the rise of jackbooted fascist purity police. They are now everywhere. And at a whim, now that there's social media, at a whim, they can cost you everything. Literally everything. Your job, your livelihood, your family, your relationships with your relatives and your loved ones, your employment anywhere, not just at your university, but any other job that you get. That fascist purity police exists now just to tear people apart. So I don't see anybody writing that big book on David Irving, much less, for instance, a big biography of him. A biography of him would be fascinating. This guy had the exact same antecedents in terms of family, intellect, schooling, precocity, intellectual predilections. He had the exact same antecedents as Christopher Hitchens. And the Dude Bro circuit venerates Christopher Hitchens. Literally, they do. Literally, they venerate him. They have made him a god. Someone that they worship, someone that they invoke posthumously, someone who has basically a church set up with religious rituals, in this case smoking and drinking, but still observances are made even by people who feel like, I really ought not to do this. Whether I like his writing or whether I think his YouTube videos are cool or not, I can tell that these habits are killing me the way they killed him. And maybe I don't want to die at 60. But, one way or another, he and Irving, I think it's why Hitchens had such initial sympathy for Irving, is because he could sense that this is, there but for the grace of God. This is very close to me. Both very comfortable speaking in public, both of them with fathers in the exact same arm of the exact same movement of the exact same military branch in World War II. Their fathers almost certainly knew each other. And on and on and on. Both of them with problematic brothers, both of them with incendiary school years, both of them with intellectual awakenings. It's just that over the course of his life, Irving fell under the spell of Adolf Hitler. And you would think that Hitler died when Irving was a little boy. You would think that would be impossible, but I've learned that it's not. I've learned that it's not. With either Hitler or any other really potent evils in history, their charm, their spell goes on. It exists even when their body has disincorporated. It's the closest thing I've ever seen to Tolkien and Sauron. And that happened to David Irving. And I think if you read his books and you watch his interviews, you can see it happening. Where he starts off disdainful and skeptical, and then slowly a horrible, evil ideology eats away at him and wins him over. But anyway, this is a very good book on the subject. I will certainly, so to speak, take it until we get a better book, a bigger book. Okay, this is Henry Hart's book on Marco Polo, Venetian Adventurer. Look at that. Big, ornate thing. Has black and white illustrations. This is from the 1930s, I think. Maybe even earlier than that. What have we got here? 1942. So a long time ago. There again, if we're talking about, I love this book, absolutely love it. But again, if we're talking about missed opportunities and might have beens, I'm still waiting for an 800-page great biography of Marco Polo. I'm still waiting for that. As far as I know, I've never seen one. If you do, if you know of one, let me know in English. But as far as I know, I've never seen one. One that encompasses not only all of his famous travels, but all of his writing. Most people who've read Marco Polo have read, whether they know it or not, brief excerpts from a gigantic body of writing. The Penguin Classic of Marco Polo's travels are brief excerpts from a gigantic body of writing. I would like a biography that encompasses all of that, maybe digs through Venetian records to find something that no one else has found. I think it's easily possible to do. And that is an example of another totally marquee historical figure, a marquee recognition name. Everybody knows the name Marco Polo, who is waiting for another biography. People say, you know, who are you supposed to write a biography about when all the biographies have been written? Well, no, that's not true. If the major publishing world could refrain for 1 year, maybe just 1 year, if the major publishing industry could refrain from publishing 15 biographies of Hitler and 15 biographies of Napoleon Bonaparte, maybe we'd have room and money. Maybe we'd have incentive for people to do biographies of people like Marco Polo or Madame Curie or a million other people I could name that don't get those biographies every year because you're serving up 10 million Washington books. Anyway. Oh, all right. Okay, this is, I don't know why I have this. This is a modern prose adaptation and abridgment of The Fairy Queen. So this is an illustrated Fairy Queen. It's a cute thing to have, but I don't know why I have it. I'm a big fan of Spencer's book, and I have it. I have Spencer's book, so I don't know why I would have this. Maybe I just thought it was a clever thing. Oh, all right, great. This is also relatively recent, and this is amazing. Just an amazing thing. What have we got? We got a date on this thing? 2015. So before we knew each other, this is June 2015. This is Simon Conway Morris, The Runes of Evolution. It's a gigantic, elaborately illustrated, double-columned book on all. I'm not hitting any illustrations. On all sorts of aspects of evolution, but the main thing that it writes about, the main thing that it deals with, is convergent evolution, which is a stumbling block, a bugaboo for dealing with fundamental creationists who think that everything was created by magic in its current form. Every form of life was created by magic in its current form. They look at convergent evolution is when the pressures on a society and the pressures in an environment work on living organisms to create, to cause a series of adaptations to that environment that look a certain way. And then eons later, or thousands of miles away and totally unconnected, those same or roughly analogous environmental pressures will work on a different set of organisms to produce a result that looks the same. In other words, that it seems like there, in some cases, in some instances, with some pressures, in some societies of some living organisms, it looks like there's a relatively small playbook of responses to those societal pressures. So you will get something like tentacles, or long necks, or flight. Flight will be convergently evolved, so that it will develop at different points in the evolutionary record. Over and over again, it will develop at different points, as if living organisms respond to certain pressures in a limited number of ways, so that if you get the right pressures in the right environment with the right organisms, that organism's society, that the population of that organism will evolve flight, powered flight. And then if you have those same pressures on a different set of organisms in a different time or a different place, that organism will also evolve flight. It's a fascinating subject. This book is quotable. It's so good. It's slightly oversized too. I don't know if you can tell that. It's slightly oversized. It's just a classic of popular evolutionary writing. A little bit on the brainy side, but I loved it. Oh my! All right. Well, here's a hefty one. This is also, I think, from before we knew each other. Let's see. I have the date here. I have a yellowing pub sheet. 2015. This is the Dennis Washburn translation of The Tale of Genji. Big, gigantic, honking thing. And this is the lovely rock-solid hardcover I have 2 copies of the Washburn translation in this room. I have the hardcover because that's what I got originally. I also have the, somewhere in here, the trade paperback, where on which I am blurbed, which is tremendous. That is still one of the things, one of the greatest honors for me as a book reviewer, is to be blurbed on a book like The Tale of Genji that I love so much. I still don't have my absolute dream. My absolute dream is to be blurbed on a Penguin Classic. And I don't think that's happened yet. I could be wrong, but I don't think that's happened yet. It would have to be that there was a classic for Viking, and that I reviewed it when it was a Viking classic hardcover, and that then years later Viking fed it to Penguin and it became theirs, and they kept all of those blurbs. And I don't think that's ever happened. To be blurbed on a Penguin Classic, oh my. But I'm pretty sure that, well, we'll get to it in this library tour. I'm pretty sure that I'm blurbed on the paperback of that Tale of Genji, and that's a thrill on its own. Okay, then we have Charles Neater's really nice old hardcover of The Travels of Mark Twain. So this is his edition. It just sort of highlights from all of Mark Twain's travel writing, which I have all of Mark Twain's travel writing in Penguin Classic, and I really love it. And I've had, at one point or another, lots of it, following the Mississippi, Innocents Abroad, Roughing It. I've had the whole of those books many times. I think I probably still do, aside from Penguin Classics. But I love this abridgment. I always have. I was so happy I had a copy of this forever and ever. And I was so happy to find a copy of it. I found a copy of this, I don't even know, just a few years ago at a used bookstore. And I had a copy of this originally years and years and years ago, and read it until it fell apart. Even though I love the unabridged Mark Twain travel writings, I still read this one until it fell apart. So that's purely sentimental. Very much a smile on my face when I see it. Okay, this is a collected Sherlock Holmes with the Sidney Paget illustrations. This is just a crappy trade paperback that I have. There's the Reichenbach Falls. I got this used, and I liked it because it was full of this ephemera. Someone had tucked in all sorts of Holmesian stuff. But this is obviously a placeholder. The ephemera can be moved to a new book. This is obviously, I just need to get this edition is a Wordsworth Classic, I think. Yeah, this is a Wordsworth Classic, an old Wordsworth paperback. What I need to do, this exact edition, is reprinted in the Barnes & Noble hardcover, the leather-bound hardcover classics, and a bunch of others. Same illustrations, only not a crappy trade paperback. I just need to go and get one of those things. I just haven't done it, that's all. So this is sort of a placeholder. It's just sitting there. Okay, then we have a work of nonfiction by a translator of Genji. This is Edward Seidensticker. This is Low City, High City, Tokyo from Edo to the Earthquake, How the Shogun's Ancient Capital Became a Great Modern City. It's a highly personal history of a city that Seidensticker loved. And this is not the only book of his that's in this room. His Genji is in this room somewhere. And also, he did a book called Genji Days, which is entirely about his working life while he was translating the Tale of Genji, his translation of Tale of Genji, it isn't all about Genji. He was doing lots and lots of other literary work at the same time, including paid book reviews, and the book is about all of that. But I find that in addition to his translation of Genji, which has a soft spot for me, it was the first one that really made me love it. The Arthur Waley translation doesn't really make you love the book. The Seidensticker translation does, and in addition to that, I love this guy's prose. I just love the way he writes. So that's what this is doing here. It's not just that it's sort of an echo of how much I like his Genji. It's that I really like his prose just in general. Okay, this is an older book. This is 1930s, I'm thinking. 1956. This is Stephen Ryn's All Ireland. Just a sedate profile by the author. There's the author with his dog of Ireland, and or no, that wasn't the author. I don't think that was the author. No, that's not the author. No, because he was much younger than that when he wrote this book. That's just some old sod with his dog. But this is another thing. We saw this already with Frank O'Connor. This is just another Ireland book. I have a sweet spot for them. I spent a lot of time in Ireland, and also Ireland is one of the places where in addition to visiting, I also lived. Not sure what gives this its pride a place to be in this room, but here it is. Then let's. All right. This is Carolyn Tickner, who was she was in a prime position in Boston to meet and get to know the great literary figures of the Victorian era. That's what this is. This is Glimpses of Authors. Her book Glimpses of Authors, which has Twain and Dickens and Lew Wallace and Lafcadio O'Hearn, talking about old Japan. Lafcadio O'Hearn, there's a great chapter on him in here. It's just one of those books that I love to revisit and also dream about. I dream about the great literary book, the great literary history of Boston that could be written using these kinds of books. You would need these books to write that. And most authors today would not even know these books exist. They're not in anyone else's bibliography. They're not in libraries anymore. Even school or university libraries don't have de-accessed something like this a long time ago. You would pretty much have to haunt a place like the Brattle Bookshop here in Boston, and you would have to know what you're looking for to find books like this, or what was the one we saw yesterday, Little Journeys in Literature, or the 2-volume history of the Saturday Club. I dream about a literary history of Boston that brings all of that together and is bursting with personalities and whatnot. And don't know that it'll ever be written, but you would need books like this to write that. And I love them on their own. And then, all right, well, yeah, this is another example of that. This is W.S. Tryon. This is Parnassus Corner. It's a life of Jim Fields, who was partnered with Jim Fields is in Carolyn Tickner's book because he was partnered with Tickner and Fields was the operation that ran the old corner bookstore, which is Parnassus Corner here in Boston. You can see vaguely where this was if you walk around on Park Street today. I would happy to show it to you. Can't go inside anymore. For a long time there was a bookstore on the corner of Park Street. There isn't anymore. I forget what it's used for, a copy shop or a coffee or something like that. But this is Tryon's history of not just James Fields, but Tickner and Fields and the exact literary era of Boston that I'm describing. Only it's too narrow. It's wonderful. It's a wonderful, wonderful book. It's the closest that we come to the kind of book I'm talking about and would be the cornerstone on which that book was built. It's just, I don't know. If hypothetically, if someone came along to write that gigantic cultural history of Boston in the late 19th century, they might call it Parnassus World or something like that, and make explicit homage to this book when they're doing it, because this would be indispensable. But it's a terrific book on its own. So there you go. So there you go. That is the next shelf in this library tour. Lots of goodies here. Also some stuff that could be winnowed, but I'm not winnowing yet. So we'll move on. I don't know what I'm going to do with the next shelf. Even the miracle tripod has its limitations, but we shall see. I'm still experimenting with all the different positions I can put this thing in. So I'll wrap this up for now, but I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.